Good day, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us. Welcome on joining the NEXUS Gains Talk 17 that will be focusing on energy, water, and multi-sector linkages in Africa. My name is Mohsen Hafiz, Director for Water, Food, and Ecosystem at CGIAR EMI, and also working as a work package lead on the trade-off analysis and foresight methodology for the NEXUS Gain initiative. And today I will be moderating this exciting NEXUS Gain talk. When we are talking about the nexus, often it's just the water, land, energy are highly interconnected and critical to the nutrition as well as the health and food security, poverty reduction, livelihood, and as well as on a gender equality, and then the climate adaptation and mitigation at multiple scales through the multiple pathways. Similarly, the SDGs are systemic with interdependencies across goals mediated by water, energy, food, and ecosystem. However, the government, stakeholders, and investors are often struggling to manage system changes in the water, food, ecosystem nexus and ensure the changes are robust under the climate change. Especially in the transboundary nature of basins where we are working under the NEXUS Gain and most of the river basin in part of Asia and Africa, that makes the integrated and sustainable water management more complicated. And then that's the system level challenges are quite complex. And then often what the intended the consequences when we are thinking about doing certain investment projects are not providing that when the answers what we are looking. So the often that when the governments, the local communities and investors are uncertain about where and how best to maintain, restore and improve ecosystem and as well as support sustainable irrigation while also generating clean energy and agro-processing needs. Investments are often not coordinated. For example, investment in water or energy remains often disconnected from policy goals of healthy diet, and reforestation often neglect ecosystem services across scales and socioeconomic development pathways. Interdependency between the resources systems also further complicate the development of water, energy, food, ecosystem resources. Given that the urgent need to mitigate and adapt to climate change, investment in energy and water supply infrastructures are being driven by a mix of the security, financial, and decarbonization objectives. To date, most planning and management of these resources have been undertaken in isolation without due consideration of other sectors. This siloed approach remains one of the biggest challenges to delivering effective, sustainable solutions. Today, the NEXUS Gain webinar will explore the intricate relationship within the WEFE nexus, focusing on the role of energy system in Africa. It will also examine the nexus from the perspective of both small-scale and national energy system modeling, offering insight into the challenges and opportunities at both scale, at the local scale, at the national scale. We have two experts who will be presenting, and their presentation will be providing the review on the benefits of linking the river basin and regional energy system for joint intervention assessment and multi-sectoral strategic planning. Case studies will examine the critical role of understanding energy demands in rural Africa as the key element in the WEFE nexus and addressing the complex challenges to promoting sustainable development in the region. So before I will just announce that one the speakers, let me first provide you some information about that one, how we'll be running this session. Okay, first there will be two speakers, and then they will be giving a presentation that will be followed by the two esteemed panelists who are joining us today. They will be providing their reflection, particularly on the presentation and providing their insight. That will be followed by the questioning and answering from the audience. So what we need to do it, if you have a particular question from any speaker, then I would appreciate if you could write the question in the question and answering box, and then write that one. We will try to address those questions after that one, after the panel discussion. And if we are not able to address those questions during the panel discussion, we will make sure that we'll come back to you with the detailed email and about the answers, what we'll be discussing it today. I will not take much of the time, but let me first introduce the first speaker, Professor Julian Harrow from University of Manchester, and he will be sharing his insights on the assessment and design of interlinked river basin and energy system. Professor Julian Harrow is chair in water engineering at University of Manchester since 2013. He has a PhD from University of California, Davis in water sources engineering and economics. And Professor Julian is leading a research group that contribute globally leading research in water resources planning and management, water energy food system, and environmental management software. He also served as a research director of the 10 million that was the fund UK Research Innovation Fund project Future Dam, which was a global project and where they have developed the model, which is one of the generalized water sources network modeling, which we called it Python. And then today we'll be hearing from Professor Julian about how the PyWR model application in part of the Africa and other some of the exciting work which he has done and his group has led it. Over to you, Julian.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Mohsen. Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be giving this seminar. So yeah, my talk is about the assessing and optimizing water energy systems. And we're doing this work in the context of the NEXUS Gains project and other past collaborations with IMI, the International Water Management Institute. So the idea is can we functionally connect the analysis of water, river basins, irrigation systems, and energy systems? It's a good idea. We often speak of this nexus, but it often stays relatively theoretical. Can we do this in a practical sense so that we can evaluate real-world options, both policy options and infrastructure investments? So we had in this initial collaboration with IMI, the Future Dams project, we created a theoretical framework to do this. And it was about allocating the benefits in river basin energy system design. How can we allocate benefits? So this was a theoretical framework, and we've just spent several years implementing it in real world systems. So let me show that today. How did we move from theory to practice? Well, the first thing you need quite serious software development and modeling. These systems are large and complex, and if you want to analyze the synergies and trade-offs in the decision making of these systems, you really need very credible tools. So I'll first talk about that. Okay, on the river basin side, we use a model called PyWR. It's a fast open source generalized water resource simulator. It describes the system like you can see here on the right. It's a node link network, and it's just the way that water resource systems have been often modeled and quantified in the last 20 or 30 years. The nice thing with this tool, in addition to it being open source, is that it runs very quickly, which means you can try many scenarios, and it also means that you can link to advanced design methods like multi-objective optimization. So this is the tool we use for a river basin simulation. Here's a quick example of what this looks like. This is using a web interface that has been built called Water Strategy. You can see this is a river basin model of the Amu Darya, a river basin. This shows you what it looks like in practice. Here's a similar screenshot of what such a model, this PyWR, what an application looks like, for example, in the Nile River Basin in East Africa. But we can't stop at river basins. If we want to look at the nexus, we need to look at the energy system. And so we thought that we really needed a spatial power system simulator. We needed to have that same supply-demand spatial network quantified so we could see how decisions in energy generation and hydropower, how they impact the power system. So we used a similar framework to create something called PyENR, which is also open source, which is a fast open source generalized power system simulator. It also allows for very quick simulation and for multiple scenario. It's just a classical power system simulator doing direct current optimal power flow. So it's just a standard, credible power system tool that we can link to the water system model. The way that we do that link is using something called the PinSim, which is open source as well, which is a integrated modeling library. And so you can see that the way that we do that is by linking the river basin hydropower nodes and the power system hydropower nodes. We link those together while the model is advancing. So it's really an integrated system, but it's an integrated system by combining independent and credible river basin and power system tools. Here's just a screenshot of what this looks like in the web interface. Here's the in red is the power system, and in gray is the Nile River Basin. So we have this, we're able to simulate the 10 or 12 countries of the East African Power Pool. So I'll show some case studies afterwards. The tool that I've showed you a few screenshots of this web interface. This is something we developed during Future Dams, and it became very handy during the COVID crisis. It's basically like Office 365 for river basin and power system models. So you create a shared model which is securely stored online, and then you can grant access to different users so that multiple people can access and work on and improve the model even at the same time in a secure environment. So that was extremely useful because for these projects you typically work with large consortia of people, and so there needs to be multiple parties that are able to access and use the model. Okay, let's go to case studies. I'm going to show you two case studies today. The first is the East African Water Energy System. This is, the East African Power Pool is an exciting organization. It's trying to improve the energy access and the efficiency of investment in East Africa. And the question we were asking here is, could new electricity trade agreements between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt help resolve the GERD dispute? The GERD is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's this dam here that's showed in yellow here. It's a large new dam on the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. And it's quite controversial because Egypt in particular is concerned that it will reduce Egypt's water supply. So the question was simple. If we selected certain strategic energy trades between the countries, would this change the way the GERD was managed, and would this help resolve, partially at least, the conflict? So just one quick result here. This figure is showing. So we have four power trade scenarios, right? So we're looking at the current system, which is relatively low power trades, and then we're just very simply imagining four scenarios with increasing number of trades. And what this histogram shows is the change in the number of weeks in which the large Egyptian dam called the High Aswan Dam, the change in the number of weeks that reservoir falls within different management zones. So what you can see here is that with the high trade, the red, this red scenario here is the high trade. So if you have a lot of energy trades between these countries, you're able to keep the High Aswan Dam much more frequently in the normal water management zone. So you're able to alleviate water scarcity and water stress in Egypt. And you're able to decrease the number of weeks that the High Aswan Dam is in these kind of dangerous zones, which is the zones of operation when the High Aswan Dam is too low. So these results show that increasing energy trade can reduce Egyptian water deficits. The study also shows that it reduces regional greenhouse gas emissions, it increases hydropower generation, and it reduces energy curtailment in Sudan, as well as increasing Ethiopia's financial returns from electricity. Let me quickly pass this case study two. This is using the same model tool set. We're looking at the country of Ghana at national scale. You can see here from this solar map that we have high solar potential in the north where it's sunny, but the energy demand is mostly in the south, and that energy demand is growing. It's growing rapidly. So the question in this case study was, how can we meet demands and reduce emissions, but also minimize ecological disruption and intersectoral conflict? So here's a screenshot of the integrated model. We have in red the power system, and in gray the Volta River Basin. There's a few details here about the size of the electrical grid model, and it's quite comprehensive. I'll skip that over quickly to just summarize a few elements of this. We're considering the hydropower release decisions at a weekly time step, the hydropower generation at an hourly time step. We're allowing the design framework to change the operating rules of the hydropower, in addition to investing in different energy technologies and different transmission connections, new grid connections. And this energy system is looking at hourly time step. So this allows us to set up this design problem where we're going to minimize costs and maximize benefits. And we do that by changing the operating rules of the dams, like I said, and investing in different energy generation around Ghana. We had three scenarios. One is we're just going to invest in solar and wind and change the operating rules. And then that's in green. In red, we're going to try to improve everything in that scenario. We're going to change reservoir operating rules, but we're also going to allow for new transmission lines and bioenergy expansion. And this, of course, I'm not going to have time to go into this in detail, but what this shows you is that as we go from this scenario one, was just allowed to invest in wind and solar and change operating rules, as we move towards this third scenario, which allow making money changes, we're able to increase the performance in the system. So a perfect system would be a line here, a straight line across the top, and you can see that these red lines just approach there much more quickly. If someone has a question about what this plot means, we can review it afterwards in the Q&A session. Let me quickly pass. If you're interested in more information on this study in Ghana, you can read this up here. As concluding remarks, I'd just like to say that spatially quantifying a river energy system interdependencies allows presenting decision makers with actionable multi-sector benefit sharing solution. And with the Ghana example, this new AI-assisted design approach helps identify strategic interventions in combined power water systems, which, considering multiple benefits, there are synergies and trade-offs. If you'd like to read more about that framework, feel free to have a look at this paper, which gives a summary of that framework. And that's it for me today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julian, for an excellent presentation and highlighting that one, how these things could be linking it together, especially the river basin, where we are planning it on the water sources, but how there's water sources with the different one, how that could be linking with the energy system, and then while optimizing those, both the water availability as well as also on that one, the energy system. An excellent presentation. And there are certain questions which will come back later on, but just now let's move on. The next speaker, who is Muhammad Amin Tahawari. He will be talking about bridging gaps, exploring energy system nexus contribution. And let me introduce Amin. Muhammad Amin is an experienced energy economic modeler working at WEFE, an independent research organization in the area of clean technology and sustainable development. He has a strong programming skills, focus on integrating energy and economic models to provide open sources tools to model the future energy transition scenarios and their environmental and economic impacts. And his main focus is on developing tools and framework to play a role in the research community, especially for energy optimization. Over to you, Muhammad Amin.
Thank you, Mohsen. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see
All
you.
right, perfect. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and time to be here today to discuss some of the researches that my research organization, WE2, is carrying on in the field of water, energy, and food nexus. And I want to have a specific focus on better understanding the demand and the role of energy demand in a proper design of the water and energy food systems in Africa. So we already know what is water, energy, food nexus. Julian perfectly explained the interaction between the systems and how it is important to see these three systems in a unified framework rather than looking at them as a standalone system. Any of the system, if it is not working, if there is a malfunctioning, a deficit, it can highly impact lots of other systems, not just water, energy, and food, but it can go beyond it, can have impact on economic system, geopolitical conflicts, and environmental pressure. So there are lots of studies that actually are trying to better understand this configuration of the system, as Julian also mentioned on the supply side, how the systems are working. But what I actually want to discuss about today is more focused on the demand side and how basically the energy demand, when it is considered as a part of this water and energy food nexus, can be estimated, and what is the role of estimating energy demand. And I want to zoom in a little bit and focus my discussion on rural Africa, rather than looking at the national aspect, where basically still 58% of the population, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, is living in these rural areas, knowing that the level of complexities that still exist there, the fact that these areas in many cases are very isolated and they have to rely on their own sources, the level of problems become more and more complicated. Only 10% of the agriculture systems in these areas are irrigated. 90% still are relying on rain-fed agriculture system, meaning that there are lots of uncertainties and risk in the supply chain of the production of agriculture products, mainly food. And on the other side, we know that the access to modern energy, specifically electricity, is quite low in these areas. And there is still a long way to go to provide access to electricity to all these areas. And we know that despite the fact that there has been lots of effort, this access to electricity, 31%, sometimes is not still enough to provide, let's say, a decent access to many services like health services or education services. But equally importantly, this electricity in many cases is not enough to sustainably boost the life of people in these areas, bringing economic value and also bringing access to higher level of energy consumption for agro-processing, for industries, so on and so forth. So in order to better clarify the interaction of these three elements in rural areas, I want to take a very simple example, and I want to use the famous supply and demand curves used a lot by economists. And let's take just one example, assuming that I'm talking about a crop, a specific crop that is need to be produced in this area. And there is a specific amount of demand by the population. We can estimate that by knowing the socioeconomic and demographic characteristics of areas. And we know that basically every level of quantity requested will lead to a specific price. And the more that we request and demand a quantity of a product, of course, the price will be lower. But we cannot just produce stuff as much as we want. There is a limitation. And these limitations are basically coming from the fact that we have limited availability of resources. Can be labor, can be land availability. And the more that we actually analyze the resources that we have, we found that some of them are more scarce than the other ones. For example, we might have enough access to land or labor, but there might be the issue of water availability, specifically in these areas that we are relying a lot on rain-fed irrigation system. The availability of water can be fluctuating a lot. And if we have some resources limited, in a way that is limiting our supply capacity, we will lead to having some unmet demand. The amount of quantity of products that can be requested by the population, but we are not capable of supplying this. So there is the point that the consumption and demand will be different. That can be the same case for energy availability. If we have low access to energy, this can even create higher unmet demand. So in case that we have unmet demand, basically we are producing less, and this can also increase the level of the so-called unmet demand, increase the unmet demand, and also increase the prices of commodities. So if we want to provide enough of commodities, let's talk about food in these areas, we need to make sure that the resources are available, like addressing this unmet demand for different commodities needs to make sure that the resources are available. And electricity actually emerged as one of the most scarce resources in this area that triggers a shortage in the supply of multiple products, not just the food products, but also any kind of other interdependent resources in rural Africa. Now, in many studies and many works that is basically going around in providing, understanding how this electricity should be provided to these areas, there is always one issue that can be kind of impacting the analysis that we are doing and the plannings that we are doing. And the fact that if we only consider the electricity needed for the households, we are basically not understanding how this potential can be unlocked and how these unmet demands for the future of these areas can be met. In many cases, the electricity access to these areas are highly low, that are basically located at very low tiers that provides access to very basic needs like lighting or a fan or a radio. But if we want to shift towards more production levels and have a more secure supply chain of any product, we need to assure that there will be enough access to electricity, modern energy, specific electricity in this area. Just to clarify how important it is, I'm presenting here a specific study in Kenya that basically tries to understand the level of unmet demand in different areas in the country. So, as I said, in many studies, the amount of energy needed by the residential sector, healthcare, or education centers is considered, is estimated, but a full unlocked potential of water and energy food nexus in these areas needs also proper estimation of the irrigation energy needs, the crop processing energy needs, and equally importantly, productive uses and commercial uses is in the area, because these productive uses are basically the main economic engine of these areas that boost the economy and makes people capable of buying new appliances, a pump or like any kind of appliances that they may use. And without providing enough energy, this will be a little bit critical. Now, I want to also have a flashback to Julian's presentation when he was saying that all this variability of available power resources is important because we are relying a lot on renewable resources, and we know that having a high resolution in terms of time is a crucial parameter for a good design. And here is the point that also we have lots of issues. So when we want to estimate the energy or electricity demand in these areas and for different uses, first of all, we have a high lack of infrastructure data. In many cases, we don't know what's going on in these areas. We don't have enough socioeconomic and demographic data. These areas have a very uncertain and a very dynamic development and urbanization systems. But more than that, we also are dealing with areas that have very high unpredictable user behavior, because we're talking about areas where the access to electricity or is zero, is very limited. And when basically people start having access to electricity, their behavior sometimes is relatively different from what we expect in countries with higher access to electricity. So this level of uncertainty in everything could be really impacting the estimation of the demand, which at the end of the day will impact the way that we design the system. So basically estimating the demand in these areas needs a very different approach, an approach that basically is capable of accounting and analyzing these unpredictable user behaviors, and can rely on minimal data collection. And even with the data that you have, it should be capable of considering the uncertainty that we have in data. And this approach should go beyond what the traditional way of estimating the demand and access to electricity in this area, just considering that electricity is for household, education centers, or health systems. And more importantly, this new approach should be basically built on top of an open source ecosystem where this knowledge can be shared, because we are still in the early ages and lacking lots of potentials for fully understanding the systems. So having an active and collaborative ecosystem basically is essential to spread the knowledge. So here's the point that I want to introduce to you, a research that has been going on for a couple of years on developing an open source software that relies on stochastic modeling approaches for basically considering all the level of uncertainties and issues that I just described in the rural context energy estimation. So this software basically is capable of generating load profile in very high resolution with minute resolution that can be resampled into hourly resolution, yearly, monthly, and seasonally, and is capable of modeling different category of appliances, like household appliances, battery electric vehicles, like cooking systems, or any kind of appliances that you can basically imagine. This software is capable of modeling this. I will keep the discussion ending here. If we have more discussion, more question, we can discuss it. But if you want to, you can just have a look on the website and the GitHub page. This is the Python package that is open source and is accessible. There are lots of studies using this software for doing their analysis, but we recently are building the first web interface that hopefully will be fully functional in a couple of weeks or maximum months. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohammed Amin, for an excellent presentation and highlighting on the key issues, especially on that one, understanding the demand loads, and then on the unpredictable user behavior and how those could play, and what are the factors which we need to consider, and how we could develop a kind of bit more robust system, and then how the modeling tool could provide a bit more information to understand those behaviors. Now with this one, I will let me move to that one, to the second part of the segment, which is about the panel discussions. But before I will go to the panel discussion, I'm thankful to the people who are writing the questions. We will be addressing those questions first. That today in the Q&A session. Let me go back into the panelists. So we have two panelists, esteemed panelists. And it's my pleasure to introduce first to Dr. Usman Altom Hamad. He has a PhD from Newcastle University, UK. He worked as a water expert at the Ministry of Irrigation and Water Sources from 1970 till he became the Minister for Water Sources, Irrigation and Electricity in 2019. He has worked extensively with the Nile Basin Initiative as the Water Policy Lead Specialist from August 2004 to 2008, and he also worked in various capacities for the in various government institutes from 2009 to the 2010 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and he also worked as associate professor in 5 Sudanese universities. So, welcome, Professor Usman Altom. Professor Usman, if you could please. If you could please open your the camera, turn on your camera. Thank you. So my question is, based on your insight experience in that in the East Africa, so you have heard the two presenters have presented the issues and that one. I want to know your reflection. What are the key things? What are your reflection on both of these presentation in the context of the Africa, where you have a very rich experience understanding that one, the water system as well as the power generation, and how what are the complexities in that part of the world? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for giving me the chance. Very nice presentations, both of them. But because of shortage of time, only 12 minutes for presentation, I can understand that they went on as an overview of what they could show. So maybe my request here will be that to share the presentations, especially the linkages to the areas that and the papers and the sites that people can go to them and understand more. I think there is a lot of wealth in what they have presented that can be useful. I hope this will be linked also to the Nile Basin Initiative as well, especially the Nile Equatorial Lakes Sub-Basin and even the Eastern Nile intro sub-basin, if there is some sort of a linkage, especially that Dr. Abdul Karim is in Ethiopia, very close to intro, and he has been working both in intro and in the Nile Secretariat in a very high position. If there is some sort of a strong linkage between what has been presented and how to be used by these two institutions, and the third institution is definitely the Secretariat, I think there is a lot of wealth that can be shared and used if there is some sort of very close coordination. And I think it is possible with the presence of Dr. Abdul Karim in Addis Ababa as well, and with his experience. I'm very glad that I have been here hearing what I have said, but it is making me more thirsty to go into more depths in what has been presented and how can the Nile Basin community can make use of what has been presented. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can just say, Mohsen, just to tell Dr. Usman that, the model, and I should have mentioned it, I didn't mention a lot of the people involved. The people who built the model were at that point PhD students like Miki Asitishia and Mohammed Bashir. They've now moved on and they're doing great things. When we built this jointly with Entro and NBI, so actually the model was built with those organizations that you just mentioned, and that's really important. A partnership is really important. Water energy systems are real world political systems, and you can't just do these studies as independent academics. You have to work with and for the local people who are relevant. So yeah, we were very pleased in this case to work with those organizations that you just mentioned.
Thanks, Julian, for highlighting that one, that you have already you have worked with the two organizations, and I think it's just Dr. Usman, you have highlighted that was the key issue about how that could be later on more used and for the operational purposes, for the more effective management of the water sources, and definitely we will explore that one, the opportunities with Abdul Karim, and then the need that Julian, that you already discussing with Abdul Karim, and how we could have enhancing further collaboration and see what are the opportunities, and maybe doing some of the case studies, and that could be possibility. So now let me move on to my other esteemed panelists, Dr. Claudia Ringler. Dr. Claudia Ringler is the Unit Director for Natural Sources and Resilience in the Transformation Strategies Department at International Food Policy Research Institute. She coordinates research at the intersection of nature, agriculture, and development for tangible progress towards more equitable and resilient food system. She is also a co-lead of the CGIAR NEXUS Gains initiative. She drives research on the role of energy in transforming food and water systems, climate change adaptation and mitigation, and water and other natural sources intervention for increased equity and resilience. And she has done an extensive work in Asia as well as in Africa in the climate resilience, in irrigation and energy system. Over to you, Claudia. First, my question to you is, what are your reflections on both of these presentations? As an expert in that one, in the clean, in the energy sector, in the irrigation, what are the challenges and That's the first part of the question for reflecting. Then second is part of question will be how what the research which has happened there, how that's linking with the Nexus Gain initiative, and what are the learning for us to pick up the thing from here for developing more interactions at the system level.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I see we have lots of questions coming in, so I really will be very short. Yeah, thanks to both presenters for really excellent insights. What I would like to highlight specifically is that those are both open access tools, and my understanding is there has been capacity sharing, capacity building. So the goal really is for actors and actor groups in Africa to take on these tools. So I think that's really, the way for the future. And that's also my question, if there is time later on, to what extent those tools go beyond being used, but maybe they can also generate data or validate data, because we have very bad data on energy, we have very bad data on water use, and so to what extent have these modeling tools already been used to improve data quality? But so related to Nexus Gains, we have 5 work packages, and I think both tools relate to all 5 of these. The first one, of course, actually is being led by Dr. Mohsin, focuses on trade-off and foresight methods. And so in the analysis, obviously, using the methods, developing some frameworks, dashboards, and applying them. So I think, this fits perfectly with Nexus Gains, and that's why we also have some collaboration on some of those tools. Our second work package focuses on improving water productivity and integrated storage management. And again, very clearly, energy and storage, water storage and energy are very closely interlinked in the African context, elsewhere. But obviously other storages also matter, groundwater storage, energy storage. And so I think, again, I see a lot of linkages there. The third work package that I lead myself, I think, as Dr. Mohsin has said, on energizing food and water systems, of course, is also very much linked to the work that you're doing. And again, there, I guess almost a question emerged for Mohammed in terms of rural electricity access in Africa is obviously hampered, that we often have only access at the village level, but not at the household level. And so how are you, differentiating between the two? And then the quality of the electricity access is, faces a lot of challenges. So we have outages, we have very low voltage on those lines. And so in fact, a lot of the things people would like to power can't be powered. So I'm just wondering how you incorporate that in your assessment. But to finalize our Nexus Gains interactions, our fourth work package focuses on governance of the Nexus. And I think Julian's example on electricity trading and how that can improve governance and management and potentially interactions across the Eastern Nile Basin countries. I think it's an excellent example of an entry point for governance improvement. And obviously, finally, our final work package focuses on capacity, sharing capacity development across the Nexus. And again, I think both of those tools are excellent entry points to work on that. Thanks so much. And with that, I hand over. I think there's a long set of questions to be answered. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Claudia. Just I will ask Julian first. Julian, if you have any brief response of Claudia, the question which Claudia have raised, and then I will be asking Mohammed before we go for the other questions.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Claudia. Yeah, unfortunately, it would be great if these simulation tools could also generate data. I think that might be true for Mohammed's because it's kind of like an agent simulation model of demand. In the tools I showed, these are traditional supply-demand simulation tools. They've really been in use really from the 1960s. So there's 50 years of tradition of using these. But unfortunately, it's not bring your own beer, it's bring your own data, right? So when you're doing simulation modeling, you have to quantify supply and demand yourself as an analyst. And obviously that's not easy to do. It's true that these models are stepping through time and simulating supply and demand at each time step. And so yeah, there's no substitute for knowing what's going on in the real world. You need to have both supply and demand information. Obviously you can generate it synthetically using global models or using approximation methods. But as we all know, the model results are only as good as your model input data. So yeah, I'm afraid so far there's no kind of magical generation of data. These traditional supply-demand simulation tools are very valuable, but often when they're used in practice, as you know, Claudia, there's decades of investment, right? So any serious organization which is managing, a multi-billion-dollar water or energy system, they do so intelligently, and they invest decades in building these simulation tools. And what's great with this approach is that you can just reuse all that data. So almost everyone that we work with, they have existing simulation tools that they've been using for 5, 10, 20 years, and we just initially just extract the data from those. So it's quite practical in the end. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian. Mohammed, any quick response from your side?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Claudio, for the question. I would go to the same question that Julian answered. So indeed, actually, with this software, we are doing lots of data validation in the sense that we try to do a short series of surveys, talking with the customers and having an initial understanding of the appliances that they have and the way that they're using it. And also in cases that the meter data are available, basically we verify those models. And the philosophy of the model is to basically have a stochastic model that you have a level of uncertainties and randomness. And there are lots of parameters that allows you to check the uncertainty of different parameters. And usually with this meter data and the initial simulation, we try to understand, for example, the type of appliances that the user are using, the hours that they are using, because they always don't have a good understanding on what is the power of the system they're using, how they use it, when they use it. So I think for many studies that I will share afterwards, we try to do this kind of basically verification of how the model is working and try to use the output to create also some, let's say, ad hoc databases for these areas.
Thank you. Thanks, Mohammed. Now, just let's move on into the questions. I will be just, the first question is, Mohammed, to you. What is the cost of the interaction with water, energy, and food in rural Africa? Land availability should not be limited. The issue is access to the land for irrigation, which requires plenty of or mix of energy supplies. Considering we have it 15 questions and we have it only 11 minutes, I would request if you could provide a brief answer of that one, and then the detail, we could share that on the paper later on. Anything. Over to you, Mohammed. First question.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I think, first of all, the answer to this question, I think, varies really village by village, country by country. So there is not a unique answer to this question. And the fact that land and labor is not really the main resource problem there is the energy. And also due to the structure of these villages and areas, the only way to really use energy is electricity. It's the only sustainable way. It's the standalone system that we can use without needing some other transportation system to move fuel. So I think if I'm getting the question right, I think the main cost is related for the agriculture system on better irrigation system and exploiting the water resources that are there, relying on not overcomplicated systems, but systems that need electricity, and not having electricity is making them not usable, even though they are not really costly. It's just a matter of like mobilizing some like money or investment to help these people to have access to this kind of technologies.
Thank you. Thanks, Mohammed. The next question I will again ask from you, that's addressing you. How would your research influence policymakers for urgent energy demands in Africa?
Sorry, is the question to me?
Yes, question to you. How would your research influence policymakers for urgent energy demand in Africa?
Indeed. Actually, in a couple of projects that we are currently doing, for example, with Morocco, we are actually helping the governments in these specific areas that there is access to electricity, but is not enough, and there are lots of issues, shortages, and it is not a reliable source of energy. We are helping them to better understand different scenarios that they have, and how basically the estimation of demand can help them to better allocate their resources on the investment and sizing of the system. So I think the best we can do is to help them to better understand the demand and understand how much of investment and capacity is needed to provide access to energy to these areas.
Okay, thank you. Just now the question is, question is maybe, I think, Julian, to you, scenario developer developed for energy, agriculture, and carbon emission. Does it have integrating the scenarios development with the other water uses, environmental flows, domestic uses, and industrial water use? Can you share the link of model or tool here? If you could share the presentation links or something. I mean, the presentation will send it later on, but any response from you, Julian?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I've been looking at the text, and I'm trying to answer as many as I can, as quickly as I can. Yeah, so the nice thing. So the problem with the Nexus is that you have these regionally distributed complex systems, and you have all these investigations. You'd like to make all these scenarios. The nice thing with doing this with concrete simulation models is that each simulation model is able to represent the relevant scenarios for their system. So the river basin scenarios can look at agricultural water use scenarios, and the power system simulator can look at the energy and carbon emission scenarios. And so, yeah, by using those credible accounting tools in each field, we're able to make a design and an assessment which makes sense overall. So I'll just so the tool was waterstrategy.org, and I'll type it in there so you have the link. But also you'll get the slides which have all the links to the tools. And what's nice today is, like Claudia said, all the tools are open source, so they're all public. Thanks.
Thanks, Julian. So the next question is, what is the most efficient model for energy? Yasser Abbas has asked. I don't know, Julian, you are the person I may be hearing from, both of you.
Yeah, so I'm originally a water engineer. Unfortunately, when you're a water engineer, you're asked to evaluate hydropower dams, and it's actually a silly question. You can only really evaluate the societal benefit of a hydropower dam if you understand how it contributes to the national power system. So that's why in our work with IMI and past work, we've invested so much in simulating power systems so that we could specifically ask that question. Does a hydropower, does a river basin change? Does it make sense, and does it serve the energy needs of a country or of a set of countries? So we use just normal power system DCOPF. This is a traditional power system engineer tool to simulate power systems, and so that's what we use in this framework. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Anything from you?
No, not really. No.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Now I will move to the next question. Is there a framework that can be extracted from this complex simulation tool that is more accessible for more mass usage? For example, when any solar project is being developed, how can we think about water and food impact, and what are the key trade-offs? Julian?
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we've shown so far is kind of a fairly sophisticated simulator. I think what you're saying is pointing to what's missing, and that's dashboards. We need to integrate this. For example, we both showed, Mohammed and I both showed web portals. I think it's important to, in addition to kind of like the detailed modeling, we also have to have those web portals in the future have a kind of high level dashboard type graphics so that decision makers and kind of introductory analysts can look at the scenarios and compare the options. So I think what you've written there is a challenge to us. We need to make these tools not just for modelers, but also just for decision makers and kind of entry level analysts. Thank you.
Julian, but that's also that one. This is, I mean, yes, that's right, that we need to have a dashboard, but it's also adding that one, the complexity about the data availability. I mean, when we are talking about any new solar project is being developed, typically we don't have that kind of information is available in the part of the developing countries in Asia or in Africa, and how that information could be available as a part of the system before we think about developing a dashboard. I don't know, I just want to hear from Mohammed Amin, what are your thoughts on that one, on the question?
Yeah, I think I wanted to also add something to what Julian was saying. So what actually we showed today was like frameworks. We're not, I mean, Julian gave also some examples of the model, but we developed frameworks that can be used for further model development. And we know that the data is very rare, but one of the issues that I always face is the fact that not having close interaction with the locals, and I'm not talking about the people, but policymakers, usually leads to a sort of disconnection of the studies that we are doing with the people who want to really use those data. So as Julian said, I think there is a need of further working on showing off the outputs of these models and mass output of these models. And of course, being open source, this brings a level of challenge that there is not enough always time or budget to also show off the outputs of the model. But I think there is the need of like more systematic provision of the outputs of these models. Otherwise, it will remain only for like inside academia, and no one will really use it in practice.
Thank you very much, Amin. Just moving on, the next question is transmission loss in electricity supply is important. So how important do you think assessing the impact of renewables in local simulations or modeling for meeting national demands are keeping focus on this factor, including for storage for the electricity trading via with private sector supply?
Well, I can give a quick answer to that from my perspective. Yeah, absolutely. The problem with trying to align water systems like hydropower with intermittent renewables like energy and wind is that the energy and the solar and wind sources can like disappear, very quickly. So that's why we model the power system with an hourly time step. The DCOPF power system simulator that we use has just linear loss coefficients. So the loss of electricity in transmission lines is represented in a simplified way linearly, but it's okay. It's good enough when you're simulating 10 countries. So yeah, I know, I agree. You need to have a good power system simulator to represent these things that you're mentioning here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Just looking also at the time, I think we have covered all the questions, and then there are a few people have suggested there that they want to do a bit of the idea for brainstorming. Yes, we'll be sharing, that power part of presentation with you guys so that you have a bit more information. And then later on, you could contact Julian and you could contact Muhammad Amin for the bit more in-depth discussion. And Amy, as a part of the institute, will be conducting those webinars regularly, and will be quite keen how we could help and in generating the new knowledge, in sharing that knowledge, and how that knowledge could be practically applied in the complex river basins, and especially dealing with the water and food system, as well as what are the byproducts, which is about the clean energy which is being generated in the system. I think I really enjoyed this today's session, and I also learned a lot about that one. From the various complex system, how the water system and then the energy system could link together, and what are the trade-offs, especially on electricity trading, and how that could be making an impact, and linking with the governance aspect and overall the positive benefit, and as well as the understanding that when the energy demand and how we could on the consumer behavior side of things, that the demand estimation and what are the gaps there, and how we could make a bit more informed decisions on that one, and what are the complex challenges. And Julian and have given the example of the 2 case studies, and then the Amin also shared an exciting examples from the east part of Africa. So thank you very much for that one. I think these tools are open source tools, and that's a really great thing. And I believe that when these tools are also available, then you guys could further utilize that one and develop it and interact with those tools. And it will be really beneficial from that you use those tools and modify those tools, and then share it how that tool could be advanced to the next stage, and that one for the better optimization of the water and energy sources in those river basins and other river basins wherever we're working. Again, considering that when the time, I'm again thankful to everyone, especially to the 60 participants who participated in this webinar. And again, NEXUS Gain team will come back with the another webinar series for the next month, and we'll share those details with you. Thank you very much. And lastly, I want to say thank you to Julian Hero for an excellent presentation, Muhammad Amin for an excellent presentation, and then the Dr. Usman Altom Hamad that for sharing your insight, practical insight, and how stressing on a partnership, and Claudia, Dr. Claudia Ringler, who shared her thoughts and how that your studies are directly linking with the work which is happening under the NEXUS Gain. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.